which puts a very interesting spin on this. He's very, the book is, for instance, a long diatribe against the Star Trek's Prime Directive, actually. The entire book ultimately comes to the idea that the Prime Directive is fundamentally a power play designed to ensure the ongoing superiority of the human race, which is not how Star Trek portrays it.
Right,
but
right.
he actually argues that that's fundamentally the subconscious motivation behind the Prime Directive.
But I don't understand why that's true. I mean, if a civilization under the Prime Directive evolved, just fine, and then developed the capacity to communicate with humans, and then communications and commerce or whatever could start. How does that benefit humanity exactly? I don't get the criticism.
Well, so the criticism is basically that in some real way, if you recognize the fundamental humanity of another person, right? And this is true actually, even with the beggar on the street on some level, right? I've read interesting reports where the thing that if people that have talked to them, the thing that bothers them most is that no one meets their eyes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because and it makes sense because we think they're going to ask us for something.
Yeah.
So we avoid eye contact to kill the conversation.
Right.
But then they go through their entire lives and nobody will meet their eyes.
Yeah, no one will see them, right?
No one will see them. They are unseen, right? And they actually describe that as being some of the worst part of the experience, right? Yeah. Because you're cut off from humanity in this weird way, right?
Yeah, right.
And so there is this sort of dehumanization that happens there. Because we don't want to meet their eye and then say, no, I can't help you, or I won't help you, or I won't give you money, or whatever. But at least it's a human interaction that you engage with. And so, there's a similar thing here where at our level, I think of it the same way realistically, right? I'm just not sure that's the right way to think about it in terms of language. It could be different. It could be just a very different.
No, but get back to how the Prime Directive is immoral. Or wrong.
Sorry. So the Prime Directive, he argues, I think, is immoral on the basis that if you truly recognize the humanity of the other species, you would treat them the way you would treat your brother. You would treat them the way you would treat, another human being. If you had an infinite plethora of resources, you don't just say, you guys suffer through it for a couple centuries until you figure it out on your own and master sort of, star travel.
So they were only their humanness was only recognized if they developed technology advanced enough to make contact, and before that, the plague could get them, and that's all. And
they just die of starvation. They go through the whole thing. How is that a compassionate response? How is it an acceptable response?
Right.
If they are fundamentally human.
That's why Picard broke the Prime Directive all the time.
Yeah.
And he always regretted it, but he did it all the time anyway.
Because any character that would be sufficiently compassionate enough for us to recognize him as heroic could never follow the Prime Directive truly to its conclusion.
I feel like there's a whole Star Trek series based on someone overturning the Prime Directive on philosophical grounds. The entire series could just be people talking in a room.
It's just interesting that the Speaker for the Dead, that is one of the contingent themes, is they have this attitude of it being for the aliens' benefit, that we want your culture to survive and all this stuff. Yeah. And they say, we see you coming up and down in spaceships, and we don't say, we want to protect our culture. We say, give me that.
Right.
We want to travel among the stars as well, right? And you've cut us off from it, right? And so, we are dying here, while you are trying to have some pseudo-noble idea of protecting our culture, right?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I never thought about it. Even I always thought of that whole Prime Directive idea as being somewhat noble, because I guess Picard kept saying it was. I guess if he thinks it's noble, it must be. Yeah. But it does make sense that it doesn't really hold muster, right? Because you're allowing all this suffering to occur.
And the idea is, there's trickiness to it, which is probably, and that's kind of the thing, right? Is that you don't give a pistol to a 4-year-old, right? But
you could
there's
give medicine, right? Here's this is how you would cure malaria. Here you go.
Sure.
Take this one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, the first Star Trek came out in the 60s, right? It was 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Right. And so that was probably around the time, it was after World War II, the British Empire had completely collapsed. So, Gene Roddenberry probably had this whole colonial thing in his mind, right? He was growing up with this empire, then the empire collapsed, and of course India, Pakistan, and all of these different countries are supposedly colonized by by the white man, and it was a white man's burden and all that stuff. So I wonder if the Prime Directive was a direct reaction to the colonial past. Is like, yes, we're rich and powerful, but we're not going to tell you how to live yourself.
We're going to keep our hands off.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, when you're ready to come talk to us, we'll agree to you as equals, right? That was probably the impetus behind it.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that, but very possibly. It may have been a reaction to colonialism of just like, okay, well, maybe raping and pillaging is not the answer. But maybe hands off isn't really the answer either, right? Maybe there's a more compassionate way to meet people.
It's either rape or pillage, or
go fuck yourself.
Can't you talk to us and be nice?
No, slow down. We're British. We don't do that sort of thing.